Throughout Overwatch League history, there's been those certain individuals who had long, prosperous careers who built their legends and forever went down as some of the greatest players to ever be in the league. But for every individual where the stars align and they have that destined, long-tenured career, we have those guys whose careers got cut short for one reason or another and was way shorter than any of us would have liked to see. Be it through unforeseen circumstances, getting unlucky, or just wanting to sit back and retire from the game, we have a lot of guys throughout the history of the Overwatch League that ended up leaving us a lot quicker than we would have wanted. Today, we're gonna pay tribute and give some love to some of these players. It's time for a lightning round. Here are a whole bunch of players that we wish stuck around the league for longer than they actually did. I really hope you enjoy. In the first place we're going to start is with Alarm. Alarm's sudden passing in November 2021 shocked the entire community as a whole. It's a shame that we never got to witness this legend play in the Overwatch 2 era, to further build upon his legendary resume, and to potentially take himself above and beyond any other support player to touch this game. Alarm's gameplay was electricity, and let's not forget what he meant to the community as well, with the positivity he brought, and the kindness to his teammates and to the fans. All of it is just something that we miss so dearly, and it makes me so sad to think that we only had him for 2 seasons in the league, and that his life had to be cut short at such an early age. To follow up, the next player that I wish stuck around the scene for a lot longer than he did is Seagull. Seagull is a guy that a lot of people forget about, just because he played in a very early stage of the Overwatch League, and obviously it doesn't really compare to the modern day standards, but anyone who watched Seagull knows how special he was, and what he meant to the early days of Overwatch as a whole, both as a streamer and as an esports player. This guy was awesome to watch. His hero pool was maybe a little niche, but he always found a way to make it work. And when given the opportunity on Dallas, when he wasn't stressed out of his mind and he could do what he wanted to, he was a solid contributor, showing that he could be one of the best diva players in the league despite barely even knowing how to play the hero prior to joining the Overwatch League. In my opinion, this guy could have picked up just about any hero he wanted to at the time and be one of the best. And I just feel so sad knowing that Dallas and Overwatch League Season 1 burnt him out to the point where he just couldn't come back, missing that familiar presence. And what this guy could have contributed in some of the future metas makes me incredibly sad, and I just wish that we got to see him for more than this 1 year, and maybe on a team that wasn't the Dallas Fuel as well. Speaking of OG players, how about our guy Pine? A guy that is synonymous with this type of conversation. We only got to witness Pine play 1 season in the Overwatch League, and then after that, never again. He wasn't good enough to be in the GOATS era, and he ended up being released by alexyOWL shortly after, and then got unlucky with the Dallas Fuel. The fact that we didn't get to see one of the most mechanically talented players in the history of the game get past Season 1 is maybe one of the biggest tragedies I can think of for this type of video. Pine maybe wasn't the most consistent player in the world, but when he was on, he was mad entertaining, and he is a fan favorite for a lot of people out there. So the fact that we didn't get to see this legendary hit scan past Season 1 honestly brings a tear to my eye. Then on the other side of things, I'm gonna go with Xayah player, another super talented hit scan player that took the world by storm in the early season of the Overwatch League. We knew what this guy could do back in 2018. Under the right circumstances, he could carry with his sniping abilities and just being a freak when it comes to the mechanics, but he was on a really terrible Florida team for a while. 2018, he carried those guys to no avail. Season 2 GOATS comes around, so he can't really exemplify his skills and make the best use of them. And then in Season 3, he was basically done with the game. He didn't play that much, BQB was taking the reins, and he was ready to move on. And I think that's really sad. When Florida finally started to turn the ship around, he was already done with the game. I really wish we could have went and taken a time machine and brought prime Xayah player onto that 2020 Florida team. It just would have been so cool to see his skills not go to waste, and it makes me sad every single time I think about it. Just to follow up with inaugural season DPS players, I'm going to throw an Effect here as well. Effect kind of just lost interest for the game, like with Xayah player and with Seagull, where he played really well in Season 1, but got burnt out trying to carry Dallas. He practiced super hard, harder than anybody else. He put in all of the hours. It never mattered. Then he didn't really care when GOATS came out, and he was just super burnt out and done with Overwatch. Can't really blame him for that. But I just wish we could have seen him play for a good team, or to get through the GOATS era and maybe come back in 2020 to play in an era where Tracer was super important again. Watching his mechanics and his practice pay off for a better team, maybe not named Dallas, would have been a super cool thing. Just witnessing Effect play DPS under normal circumstances and maybe a slightly less stressful environment would have been dope, and I think it's really sad that his talents were completely wasted in his prime in that 1 year. Next up, we're going to move into a Season 2 DPS player. You know him, you love him, he's a runaway legend. I'm talking about alexyOWL. This guy's career was just so tragic. He was Rookie of the Year in 2019, one of the best players in the game on Vancouver, but he just so happened to sign to a garbage org, and he never really got many chances after that to shine. He ends up finding a new home on New York, but that team was never going to go anywhere, and then we never got to see him in the league ever again. One of the greatest players ever, a guy that is still celebrated widely to this day as maybe the best Genji ever, only played like 1.5 seasons in the Overwatch League. His story, working his way up from Runaway to make it to the league, that was his dream, and we pretty much only saw one full season where he was mostly playing Brig and then some Doom and Genji here and there. Like, I can only imagine how sick it would have been if we got to see alexyOWL in the Overwatch 2 era when JOTS came around. He would have carried on Genji. I think it is an absolute tragedy that this guy's career was cut so short and that he lost interest in the game after 2020. It's so stupid what happened in Vancouver. If he maybe played for a more stable franchise back in the day, maybe he would have made it that far. For the 7th player on this list, I'm going to do a triple whammy for you and say Ryu Jae-hong, Zumba, and Miro. I think these 3 guys all needed to play longer than they did, just knowing the legendary resume they had before the Overwatch League started, and what they meant to not only the World Cup, but also Lunatic High. These 3 are predecessors of their respective positions for the early days of Overwatch esports, and for Jae-hong and Miro in particular, they were just generally incredibly important for the history of the game back then, and what they meant with how they innovated the flex support and Winston roles. And you know what happened? None of these guys even made it past early Season 3, and Jae-hong was the only guy that even got to that point. Miro, Jae-hong, and Zumba all were unfortunately victims of a very dysfunctional Dynasty team early on, and that really screwed up what they could have been in the Overwatch League. It made arguably all 3 of their careers flops. And just knowing what they were before, that is absolutely tragic. I mean, under better circumstances, they probably all could have succeeded and achieved that vision that they initially had when joining the Overwatch League. We all know they had it in them. I mean, Jae-hong after Season 1 was noticeably better, but then he joined Vancouver, his career was cut short after they cut ties, and then he decided that enough was enough. When we knew he still had juice left in him, when we knew he still could have been an excellent Ana, in an Ana meta in fact. It's just crazy that we got robbed of that because of Vancouver burning him out and him losing interest in the game afterwards. With somebody like Miro, I admit he did not play very well. His Winston was not what it should have been, but I also think he was victim of playing on a bad Dynasty team that wasn't on the same page, and again, he was super legendary as a guy pre-Overwatch League, and he just never got that second chance. I think it's crazy that he never even got an opportunity for redemption because of what happened in 2018. And with somebody like Zumba, even back then in the inaugural season, I always felt that he was a pretty good player. And when given the opportunity in 2019, again, he was consistent, but they straight up benched this guy for Michelle when he showed that he could still very reliably be a starter in the league. I just think it's insane that 3 players from that legendary Lunatic High team never got to really have much of a spotlight in the Overwatch League, and I just wish we could have seen them play as starters for a bit longer. Let's keep the OG train going and do a quick one here. How about our guy Fraggy, the Finnish legend, the Giga Chad, the Viking, the Rhine God, whatever you want to call him. This dude was an absolute champ, just so fun to watch back in Season 1. The way he'd play Rhine, it was like bumper before bumper, maybe a bit less feed-worthy, but you get the idea. Just the way he played was incredibly entertaining. It sucks that he wasn't really good enough to be in a dive era, but I just would have loved to see this guy play play Rine once in GOAT. I think it's so sad that he ended up being perma-benched as soon as Sada was eligible to play, because I think it would have been fun to watch like him versus Bumper amongst other people. But alas, we only got one season of the Chad. Heading back into the 2019 Legends era, how about Ding? Anyone else feel like his career dropped off ridiculously fast? In 2019, he was a role star, he was a carry for Shanghai, the Pharah Sombra god, and then boom, 2020 he's permabenched because Shanghai pick up Fleta, and we basically never hear from the guy again. He plays a couple of games here and there, but we all know he's never going to be a perma starter, and I think that's really, really sad. He was genuinely a superstar for the Shanghai team, and was a pivotal member of making that turnaround happen back then, with their Stage 3 title, and winning as many games as they did. Speaking of legendary 2019 Shanghai players, how about Diem? This guy had a somewhat lengthy career. He was able to go a couple years for this Shanghai team as well, and he got more playtime than Ding, that much is certain. But it was clear in the second season that this was definitely Lip's team, the future was centered around him, and we saw his playtime slowly but surely drop off, alongside some health issues that made it even harder for him to play on stage. Now, to be fair, he did get featured in a couple of pretty important tournaments for the Shanghai team, but again, we knew it wasn't going to last. The future was all about Lip, and that was basically the end of his career right after that. And I think that's super sad because he might have been one of the most talented hitscan/snipers of all time. And the fact that he didn't get to feature it that much when DPS became more relevant after 2019 is a tragedy, and I just wish we got to see him express his talent in a more meaningful situation as a full-time starter. Another DPS that a lot of us wish we got to see more of, maybe more so in the early days, was Defran. A guy that is a very polarizing figure in this community. A lot of people love him, a lot of people hate him, but all of us had to admit that at his peak, he had some of the most crazy tracking and mechanics out there. He was just in a tough spot with the whole selfless drama and being banned from Overwatch for a bit, because if he had played in 2018, it could have been super entertaining, just knowing how Tracer-centric things were and how great he was on that hero, along with Soldier. It could have been very entertaining. And I mean, even in 2019 when we got to see him played, we got robbed of his DPS most of the time because of how prominent Goats was. And after Stage 1, he decided enough was enough, he felt pressured to keep going, so he stopped. And eventually, Rollock happened, and once again, we got robbed of potentially seeing Defran on DPS. And you think about the years afterwards, where how relevant Tracer was. And it just sucks to know that Defran didn't have the motivation to grind, and that he was done with it. Because if he was at prime motivation when the league hit its peak like that with DPS, it would have been sick to watch this guy play. I don't know how successful he would have been, but man, it would have been entertaining at the very least. On the topic of these polarizing figures, next we have to go with Fissure, a guy who had a pretty legendary start to his career. It seemed like he could end up being one of the greatest tank players of all time, but the drama that ensued after, alongside motivation issues, completely ruined what could have been a pretty awesome career to watch. Fissure ended up having a great start with the Gladiators, being an MVP candidate, but then after that falling out happened, his career was just never the same. It seemed like he could be a good leader on the Dynasty, but soon after he burnt out. Then when he got his motivation back, he joined a very dysfunctional Titans team that promptly let him go, and then that was the end of his career right there and then. He just never got that proper second chance between motivation and being super unlucky, and I think that's a pretty big tragedy just knowing how great of a Winston player he was and how explosive of a main tank player he was. When I look back at it and how big of a carry he was as a main tank during the time, it just seems like his career was an absolute tease. Following up with the list of talented hitscan players, it's gonna be Xayah, a guy that we all know the story of all too well. On the Paris Eternal during the early days, he was a star, bringing this team back from the dead and finally putting them on the map. Then he deals with health issues despite being an MVP candidate. He takes a break for a while, comes back as part of that miraculous Summer Showdown run, and then basically his career was over. Genuinely one of the craziest lightning in a bottle careers of all time. At his peak in his rookie season, one of the best players in the league, MVP level in fact, and then after that, it's just nothing. Health issues plague him even more. He could have been a valuable starter on 2021 Dallas, but he just needed time. And at some point during that period of recovering, he just lost that edge. Maybe the motivation, maybe the competition caught up to him or something, but something changed in him and he just wasn't the same guy, leading to Hydron being the better player when he tried to compete with him on the Florida Mayhem for starting playtime, and then his career was done after that. I think it really sucks that we got robbed of Xayah in his prime because of these health issues, because if he had actually played fully on that Dallas team, and even more so on Paris, he could have had maybe one of the best DPS careers of all time, but it got taken away from us. Next up, I'm going with a pick that may be a little controversial. I'm talking about the Zenyatta legend himself, Jonek. It's true that he had a pretty long career, and a very successful one at that. He played 4 seasons in the league and is widely recognized as one of the greatest flex supports of all time, but it's kinda a tragedy that he never made it to the Overwatch 2 era, and that we never got to see him start his second career, so to speak, on the Seoul Dynasty. Think about how he could have done on the new and improved Zen with more health and the kick, or him trying to master Kiriko. With those mechanics, it could have been a thing of beauty. And don't even get me started on how we were robbed of a fever dream level trio of Jonek, Smurf, and Prophet. Those guys on the same team would have been a magical thing to witness, but it was taken away from us, as in 2022, before the season started, Jonek wanted to focus on some health issues, and he since then basically retired from professional Overwatch. We've not seen the Octopus King since, and it makes me very sad. Another guy that seems to be talked about nonstop, even to this day, is Moth. Moth is one of those guys who had a long, successful career, and arguably to this day is maybe still the best main support player of all time, but his career just got cut short. He never made it to the Overwatch 2 era. It was clear the Gladiators didn't want to play him anymore. It was obvious he was growing detached from the game too, so it was never going to happen. But god, do I wish we got to see Moth play one last time in some of these Lucio-centric metas that came at the beginning of Overwatch 2. It would have been sick to see this guy have one last hurrah, regardless of what team it was on. But it was just cut short. We never got to see much of a career post San Francisco Shock because of the skewed situation on the Gladiators. Dude was always dependable and reliable throughout his career, and I would have liked to see him get another chance and to see his motivation not disappear like that. And again, so many people talk about this guy nonstop. Anytime I've ever streamed, basically, like any sort of Overwatch League co-stream in the past, people are like, where's Moth? Where's Moth? Everybody wanted this guy to keep playing, and it goes without question. On the other side of it though, we have guys who lost their motivation really quickly after joining the league, and one great example of this is most certainly Pattypan, a guy that we had to wait years to watch as he didn't hit that age restriction for the league for a very, very long time. He was a young prodigy, had to bide his time, grinds in Valorant for a while, finally gets his chance to compete in the Overwatch League and achieve his dream, and he ends up being a young star for the Gladiators. He helps bring home 2 tournament titles, things are looking great. He's showing that he can still hang in there after all these years and that it's meant to be for him a star on the rise, but then, boom, it's done. Out of nowhere, he's like, yeah, I've had enough of Overwatch. I achieved my dream. This game sucks. I'm peacing out. And that was that. It's honestly a blur what happened with Pattypan's career. He came in, he conquered, and he was gone. And just knowing the potential he had, that sucks. Speaking of Gladiator rookie sensations, how about his teammate Riner? Another guy that a bunch of people to this day really wish made it past Season 5. And unlike Patty, he played for a whole season on the Gladiators, and the entire time he was arguably one of the better tank players in the league. There was a bit of mental boomage in the Jotes era, but aside from that, I mean literally, he was a role star level player that year. He was excellent at most things that he touched, and I think that he probably could have still been a star player who made some kind of difference for a different team. If it wasn't the Gladiators, maybe somebody else. But after Season 5, he decided to focus on his health, amongst other things, and he lost his interest in competing just like that. And just knowing how popular he was, that's kind of wild to think about, that things ended so quickly. If you're part of the stream culture on my channel, then you know. Everybody seems to be asking about this guy. So the fact that it was over so quick, I think disappointed a lot of fans worldwide. The next guy on the list might be my favorite of this video. It's Libero. I don't think people talk about this guy enough anymore, and it's a tragedy, as for each season of his career, he was always reliable and one of the better flex DPS in the game. Extremely flexible, very consistent, and at his best, maybe one of the best players in the Overwatch League. But after Season 3, he had completely lost his motivation, and I believe he got some money investing in like crypto or something like that, so I can't blame him for bouncing. It just feels like his career got cut a lot shorter than it should have been, just knowing how reliable he was throughout his entire career. In Season 1, he had a lot of responsibilities and had to pick up a lot of heroes. He did so effortlessly as arguably the best flex DPS in the league outside of like Prophet. Then in Season 2, he plays a pivotal role to New York's playoff run as a solid Doomfist player. And then in Season 3, his reward for all of that is basically watching from the bench as they do everything they can to disrespect this guy by picking up other flex DPS, such as Who Are You and Hoxel. He was benched in a bunch of different metas where he could have been very useful to the team. They started him on Hitscan for some apparent reason in like 1 or 2 matches, and then the one time we got to see him shine on a role he was good at in Echo, he was one of the best in the league on her. Yet in spite of that, in spite of always putting out good efforts, they did everything they can to push this guy out the door. I think it's really sad that he lost his motivation after Season 3. As I think it would have been great to watch this guy play on a different team as a starting player again in Season 4. He still could have been a star in the league, don't at me. And lastly, to close out this video, I have a double whammy of Super and Choi Hyobin, 2 legendary San Francisco Shock tank players who had very successful careers and were champions and whatnot. They technically didn't have anything to prove, I understand that, but I think it's more so of a curiosity thing. I would have loved to watch these guys play as solo tanks in the Overwatch 2 era. Super on the Shock, Choi for whatever team he decided to play on. It would have been interesting. I don't know how successful they would have been, but just knowing the careers they had, it would have been fun to watch them go out there one last time and compete with the new guys in a new era. But alas, Super wanted to focus on streaming, and Choi lost his motivation to play the game. He focused on military service, and that was that. 2 of the most legendary players to ever touch the game never made it to arguably the most competitive version of the Overwatch League itself, and I think that's a tragedy. Not to mention that Super was maybe the most important personality to the league ever, so losing out on him so soon when we were entering a new era of the game also did not help at all, and I think made a lot of us sad collectively. But oh well, all these guys move forward, and life continues to move forward, as it always does. Let me know what you think about this down in the comments below, and what other players you think should have played longer than they did, or you wish they did at least. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, it would mean a lot to me if you could leave a like, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I make Overwatch League content just like this every single week. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.